Ontario, Canada, late at night. A rental home fills with gunfire because somebody, somewhere in a cocaine organization, got the address wrong. A Sikh family that had nothing to do with trafficking is suddenly trapped inside a war they never joined.
For months, the late-night shooting in a Toronto suburb left police baffled. Now prosecutors are revealing more.
A father is killed. A mother dies after taking round after round. A daughter survives, but with a bullet still lodged in her body.
Just give me 1 minute.
That's okay, take your time.
My father was shot in front of me. I heard my mother's last screams, and after that, it was complete silence. Only the noises of gunshots were there.
That is where this story really begins. Not on a podium, not under Olympic lights, not with national pride, but with the human cost of a machine that had learned to treat murder like problem-solving. And the center of that machine was not a street kid raised in chaos. It was Ryan James Wedding, a former Canadian Olympian. That is what makes this story hit differently. It is not about a man who had no exits. It is not about somebody born with one foot in the underworld and the other in a grave. Ryan Wedding had structure. He had coaching. He had opportunity. He had multiple off-ramps. And each time life handed him a chance to stop, he chose the road that went darker, richer, and harder to come back from.
Former Canadian Olympian turned top 10 most wanted on the FBI list, Ryan Wedding.
Is underway for a former Olympic athlete who's now on the FBI's most wanted list.
And just to tell you how bad of a guy Ryan Wedding is, he went from an Olympic snowboarder to the largest narco trafficker in modern times. He is a modern-day El Chapo. He is a modern-day Pablo Escobar. And he thought he could evade justice.
So the real question is not how a gangster became more violent over time. It is this: how does a man go from the Olympic training system to a transnational cocaine network and cross-border murder contracts? To answer that, you have to start in a place that looked nothing like the life he would later build. Ryan James Wedding was born in Thunder Bay, Ontario, into a family already rooted in winter sports. This was not random exposure. Skiing was part of the family structure. Mount Baldy was part of the family world. His father, grandparents, and relatives were all tied, one way or another, to that culture. Competition, coaching, resort life, the routines and discipline that come with it. In other words, Ryan did not grow up on the outside looking in. He grew up inside a system that already knew how to develop talent. When the family moved west to Coquitlam, British Columbia, the sport changed, but the pattern stayed the same. Ryan found snowboarding, and people around him saw the traits that matter early: nerve, ability, ambition, a willingness to push harder than the next kid. More importantly, he was not left to figure it out alone. He had structure, he had guidance, he had people investing in him. And by 2002, that investment had paid off. Ryan Wedding made Team Canada for the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. The legitimate door was open, but an open door does not matter much if it does not lead to the life a man thinks he deserves. For Ryan, the problem was not that sports gave him nothing. It was that sports did not give him enough. Not enough money, not enough status, not enough visible proof that he had made it. What began to matter more than training or competition was the image of success. The watch, the clothes, the apartment, the feeling that people looked at you differently when you walked into a room. That shift showed up in Vancouver's nightlife. Working as a bouncer, Ryan was supposed to keep trouble out. Instead, he drifted closer to the people who seemed to live by a different set of rules. Dealers, smugglers, men who moved cash fast and carried themselves like consequences belonged to somebody else. Around them, ordinary work started to look small, and the outside changed because the inside had changed first. Designer clothes, expensive taste, a Breitling on the wrist, a lifestyle that moved far beyond what any normal paycheck could support. That is the key to what came next. Ryan Wedding was not pulled into the underworld because he was desperate to survive. He was drawn to it because it seemed to offer what sports never could: fast money, fast power, and a bigger image of himself. That promise first took concrete form in Maple Ridge at a property called 18 Carat Farms. On paper, it was just land. In reality, it was Ryan Wedding's first serious step into industrial-scale crime. This was not some sloppy backyard grow with a few plants hidden behind a fence. It was a real operation. Thousands of marijuana plants spread across multiple buildings, supported by heavy electrical use, irrigation systems, and high-intensity lighting designed to push yield as far as possible. The kind of setup that costs real money, requires planning, and only makes sense if you are thinking bigger than quick side cash. By the time the RCMP took notice, the place was already large enough to stand out. When police raided the farm in 2006, they found exactly the kind of evidence that should have ended somebody's future. Thousands of cannabis plants, dozens of pounds of dried marijuana, and firearms. It was the sort of bust that, for a lot of people, would have felt like a warning shot from the law itself. Stop now. Walk away while you still can. But Ryan did not read it that way. That is the hinge point. Because the raid did not convince him the system was closing in. It convinced him the system still could not pin him down. The case did not connect tightly enough to him for prosecutors to put him away, and Ryan took the wrong lesson from that escape. A lot of men back off after a near miss. Ryan Wedding decided he could go deeper. By 2008, the marijuana money was no longer enough, and the setbacks had not made Ryan smaller. They had made him more reckless. After taking heavy losses, he did not retreat into legal work or even scale back to something safer. He reached for a bigger market, a harder drug, and a wider map. That meant cocaine. That meant cross-border business. And that meant moving into circles where money did not travel through banks, but through trust, codes, and intermediaries. That is where Hassan Shirani entered the picture, along with the Hawala network that could move large sums quietly outside ordinary financial channels. From there, Ryan stepped into a deal in Southern California with Shirani and Michael Krapchen, chasing a cocaine buy that was already under FBI surveillance. This is the moment where the limits of the earlier Ryan Wedding come into view. He was ambitious, yes, but he was still green in all the ways that mattered. He showed up in person when smarter men would have stayed one layer back. He trusted the wrong people. He walked into a transaction bigger than his real experience. And he did it in a space where federal agents were already listening, watching, and waiting. When the arrests came in San Diego in 2008, the whole thing should have collapsed right there. Shirani and other pieces of the case moved toward cooperation. Ryan did not. He shut down. He said nothing. On the surface, that silence could look like discipline. In reality, this was the first true crash of his criminal life. The moment when a different man might have understood the ceiling and backed away from it forever. Ryan took a darker lesson. This was not the end of his story. It was the rough first draft of the far more dangerous man he would become. In court, Ryan Wedding did what a lot of defendants try to do, and very few pull off well. He stood there and played the part of a man who had finally understood the size of his mistake. He spoke the language judges want to hear: remorse, second chances, rebuilding, wasted promise. And somehow it worked. Instead of getting crushed by the full weight of what he was facing, he walked away with a sentence far lighter than the one that should have buried the life he was building. But the real damage came after the courtroom, inside the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego. Because prison did not hit Ryan like punishment, it hit him like access. Around him were men with pieces of the world he had only brushed against before, people with ties to Mexican cartels, traffickers who understood cross-border logistics, men who knew how to move money without leaving a clean trail. how to hide product, how to break a chain of communication into so many parts that nobody below the top ever saw the whole machine. Ryan was no longer sitting near street-level ambition. He was sitting near infrastructure, and he learned. He learned that if you want to last in that world, you cannot keep moving like an eager amateur who shows up to everything himself. He learned that if you want to scale, you need cartel supply, not just local hustle. And he learned that survival depends on distance, distance between the boss and the load, between the money and the source, between the order and the man who gives it. That is why this part matters so much. Prison did not break Ryan Wedding's ambition. It stripped the amateur out of it. When Ryan came back to Canada, he did not look like the next architect of a transnational cocaine route. On paper, he looked finished, bankrupt, unemployed, leaning on family support. The kind of man people assume got burned, humbled, and pushed to the edges of his own life. But that surface was misleading. Beneath it, Ryan was already trying to build something bigger than anything he had touched before. In Montreal, he surfaced alongside Filipos Colaros, a figure described as having direct ties to Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. And this is where you can see the change prison had made in him. The Ryan Wedding, who stumbled into the 2008 case, had acted like a man chasing a deal. The Ryan Wedding who appeared here sounded like a man trying to design a corridor. He was no longer talking only about buying cocaine. He was talking about movement, boats, cargo capacity, handoff points, shorelines, weather, landing spots, the practical details that decide whether a shipment lives or dies. He was thinking like an operator. That matters, because once a man starts asking those questions, he is no longer just trying to touch product. He is trying to control the route that carries it. The proposed test run was measured not in a few bricks, but in hundreds of kilograms. That alone told the story. Ryan had moved beyond the mindset of a buyer and into the mindset of a planner, someone trying to turn supply into infrastructure. Then came Operation Harrington. The RCMP moved. Arrest warrants were issued, but by the time law enforcement closed in, Ryan Wedding was already gone. And that is the real turn here. Up to this point, he had still looked like a defendant who happened to be running out of chances. After Montreal, that changed. He was no longer disappearing like an ordinary fugitive. He was beginning to disappear inside cartel protection. And once Ryan Wedding reached Mexico, the story changed again. He was no longer just a man hiding from warrants. He was now moving inside the shadow cast by the Sinaloa cartel. And that changed what was possible. With Andrew Clark at his side, Ryan helped build something far more disciplined than the loose, risky schemes of his earlier years. Cocaine moved north from Colombia, through cartel corridors in Mexico, into Southern California, and from there, the line stretched toward Canada. The geography mattered, but the real power was in the system behind it. This was no longer about one man showing up to buy product. It was about building a route that could keep moving, whether Ryan's name was visible or not. At the center of that route was Los Angeles. That was the hub. Loads came in, disappeared into stash houses, got broken down, held, shifted, and then pushed forward again by long-haul truck. From there, the shipments moved north through a relay structure designed to keep the full picture hidden from almost everyone inside it. Drivers knew the next stop, not the source. The people guarding the stash houses knew what they were holding, not where it would end up. The money side worked the same way. A man could be deep in the machine and still understand only his own small slice of it. That was the point. Ryan had learned that survival in this world depended on distance and compartmentalization. So the system was built to keep everyone separated from the truth. Product and payment were verified using photographs of banknotes, with serial numbers serving as proof that the right people were meeting the right people at the right moment. Communications moved through encrypted apps like Threema, where instructions could travel fast without being spoken in the open. The less anybody knew, the harder it was to break the whole chain with one arrest. And that is where Ryan Wedding finally became what he had been moving toward all along: a real operator. He did not need to touch every load. He did not need to stand in every room. He did not need to risk his face every time cocaine changed hands. He could stay back and still control the rhythm: who moved, who got paid, where the pressure went, when the product advanced. By this point, the thing he had built no longer looked like a hustle. It looked like a company. The only difference was that its product was cocaine, and its enforcement division carried guns. But companies built on fear do not stay stable for long. They harden, they become colder, and eventually, money and secrecy stop being enough to hold them together. That is what happened here. As Ryan Wedding's network expanded, violence stopped being a backup plan and became part of the management structure. If product vanished, somebody was expected to pay for it. If money went missing, that debt did not stay on paper. If anyone looked like a risk to the system, someone talking too much, someone stealing, someone exposing a weak point, that person was no longer treated like a problem to solve with distance or discipline. They were treated like a message to send. That is the shift that matters, because once murder becomes a form of business communication, the machine changes. It stops being a trafficking network that sometimes turns violent. It becomes a trafficking network that uses violence to keep everything moving on time. The clearest example was the attack on the Sidhu family in Ontario. The organization was hunting a man they believed had stolen cocaine, but the address was wrong. The people inside that home had nothing to do with the drug trade. Jagtar Singh Sidhu was killed. Harbhajan Kaur Sidhu was shot and later died from her wounds.
My father was shot in front of me. I heard my mother's last screams, and after that, it was complete silence. Only the noises of gunshots were there.
And Jaspreet Kaur Sidhu survived, but with catastrophic injuries that would mark the rest of her life. That is what this kind of system does when it starts treating human beings like coordinates on a map. It does not just punish enemies, it destroys strangers. And even that was not the edge of it. Around the same period came the killing of Randy Fader in Niagara Falls, another act tied to the expanding reach of the organization. Prosecutors linked that violence to Andrew Clark and to Malik Damian Cunningham, a gunman who, according to the case, had been sent to Mexico for training before being sent back north with targets and instructions. That detail matters because it shows the next stage of the machine. This was not chaos, it was development. People were being moved, trained, assigned, and used. By now, the old framing no longer works. This is not just the story of a former Olympian who drifted off course. That version is over. What stands in its place is something much harder to look at. A transnational operation that had learned to preserve itself through intimidation, execution, and fear. Ryan Wedding had not simply entered the underworld. He had helped build a system that knew how to kill in order to keep doing business. And once a machine learns to kill to protect itself, the next step is almost always the same. It starts trying to erase the people who can explain how it works. After Ryan Wedding was charged in the United States, prosecutors say he moved to silence Jonathan Acebedo-Garcia, a witness who had the potential to tear open the case from the inside. According to federal authorities, the effort went far beyond a quiet threat. A large bounty was allegedly put in play. Photographs of the target were pushed out through the dirty news. Electronic tracking tools were used to help locate him. This was not panic, it was method. It was a system reaching across borders to remove one dangerous witness before he could speak in court. And in Medellin, in January 2025, Jonathan Acebedo-Garcia was shot dead. That was the final mistake, though Ryan probably did not see it that way at the time. His failure was not simply that he kept hiding in Mexico. It was that he still wanted to control everything while hiding there. He still wanted to direct the flow, shape the response, leave fingerprints on how the organization moved. And that gave investigators something to follow: assets, vehicles, communications patterns, close associates, movement chains, the invisible habits that form when a man believes distance is the same thing as safety. By January 2026, Wedding had been arrested in Mexico and returned to Los Angeles to face federal charges tied to bulk cocaine shipments, multiple murders, attempted murders, and the killing of a witness. And that is where the story finally closes. Ryan Wedding did not fall because he lacked talent. He fell because he believed he could disappear and still keep conducting the orchestra. He believed he could step out of sight without ever loosening his grip. He was wrong. And the real price was never the lost career or the Olympic name turned into a federal headline. It was the families shattered, the bodies dropped, and the lives broken after every chance he had to stop and chose not to.